Jesus gives us an interesting teaching. The teaching is simply this: I am not bringing peace, Jesus says. I'm bringing division. But what does he mean by that? This is the Prince of Peace. It's kind of an interesting story. One of the parishioners at the Cathedral of Holy Cross in Boston, Kelly Clark, she does crossword puzzles that are based on the Bible readings for the week. And when these particular readings came up before, the crossword puzzle's title was Contrary to Christmas Carols. And so we understand that, and we look at those words and we say, isn't that an interesting way to look at who Jesus is? We look at him as the Prince of Peace, but he says, I'm here to bring division. Division? How does that make any sense? Well, if you've truly lived your faith, then you'll understand what that means. Because you find yourself on the outs. I know of people who have chosen to be priests who were disowned by their family. I know people who have chosen to live their faith who find themselves on the outs with members of their family. And I know of people who choose to live their faith who end up in difficult situations. I had a priest friend of mine who was stationed in Peru who had his parish center blown up by the Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path guerrillas of Peru. These things happen, and they happen because Jesus is the Prince of Peace to those who seek to follow him. But we live in a world among those who reject that Prince of Peace for their own personal gain or some other gain. That's why you always have to be aware of those who say, I will promise you peace, because no one ever will. If the Prince of Peace cannot promise you peace, unless you follow him, then no one can promise you peace. And you have to be careful of that person who says, I will build the perfectly peaceful society, because the person who can promise you that will build a peaceful society, and you'll have to compromise your values to live in it. If you look at the history of the world, you'll see that the most peaceful societies are the ones that are also have the least freedom. There's a great quote, and I can't think of the name of the man. He was a black activist, and during the 60s, and he, in absentia, in exile, in the United States, he was exiled from the United States. He was tried and found guilty of serious crimes related to his protesting during the 60s, which back then may have, I'm not exactly sure what his crimes were, may have included some terrorism. He eventually came back to the United States and turned himself over to authorities and went to prison. And they asked him why he did this, because he was living as a free person in Algeria. And he said, prisoners in the United States have more freedom than free people in Algeria. Because that happens. People in the world can live in a safe environment if, in fact, the environment is intensely restricted. But if you want to take the risk, then the only way you're going to live in a safe, peaceful environment is when everyone in the environment chooses to do that. And that's where Christ comes in. He is the Prince of Peace for those who choose to follow him and do what he asks. But he is not the Prince of Peace for those who are looking for a different peace than he has to offer. And that's the warning. And there are many people understanding that have chosen to follow Christ, knowing that puts them out on the outs with the authorities that want to give a different kind of peace. Great story if you have a chance to read it. Walter Ciszek's He Leadeth Me, a priest who spent 15 years in the Soviet prison system, including in the gulags in Siberia. Why? Because he was a priest. That was the reason, for that simple reason alone. Why? Because he lived his faith. Great story, and I highly encourage you to read it. And one of the interesting things about the story is not only was he on his outs with the government, he ended up on the outs with some of the prisoners. Why? He was a slave in the gulags, and therefore he was forced, like everyone else who was in the gulags, to work at the demand of the Soviet government for nothing. His mindset, I'm actually working for God. I'm not working for the Soviets. Therefore, for God, I will do the best job I can. His fellow prisoners felt he should do a lousy job. When you're working for the Soviets, you do a lousy job. No, I'm not working for the Soviets. I'm working for God. I've taught prisoners when I've done prison ministries to remember when they are obeying the guards, the corrections officers, they're not obeying the corrections officers, they're obeying God. And they're doing what he asked them to do by doing what they asked him to do. It's that same principle. But sometimes that can put you on the outs with those who say, no, you want to fight the system. Well, you fight the system the way Christ calls you to do, by loving others. And you love others by doing what Christ calls us to do. And when we do what Christ calls us to do, it's amazing. You are called to be the best of citizens, yet we may live in an environment that, despite our call to do that, may say, we don't want you Christians here, we want you out. We don't want you Catholics here, we want you out. This is the way it happens. You still choose to say, yes, I choose to follow you. So that's some of the issues that we see in today's gospel. And when we look at that in today's gospel, we simply ask the question, am I choosing to follow the Prince of Peace regardless of the cost? Or will I choose peace at whatever cost I have to my own personal integrity? That's the question. And hopefully the answer is the former and not the latter. God bless you.